This is Chet Berger on April 22nd, 2009, in my 89th year. I'm going to tell the story of some of my experiences in the military, in the Army, in World War II. I got my draft notice in the form of a postcard in the fall of 1942, and the date for my induction was set for December 30, 1942. The draft board had a very large quota to fill for the year 1942, and they were filling it before the end of the calendar year. During the fall of 1942, the big fighting was on the Russian front at Stalingrad, and it seemed all very remote at that time. Most of my friends who lived in New York City at that time were drafted from New York, sent for basic training down to Miami Beach, Florida. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened. The induction center at that time was Grand Central Palace, which was on Lexington Avenue, and it seems to me, I recall because the building is no longer there, it was about 45th Street and Lexington Avenue. And we were sworn in, and the first thing that happened after we were sworn in was that the black soldiers, who were new soldiers like us, were immediately pulled aside, and we never saw them again. The white soldiers, we were put on taken, as I remember, by truck over to Pennsylvania Station at 34th Street and 7th Avenue, and we were sent out on a Long Island Railroad train to Camp Upton, which was where the site of the present Brookhaven National Laboratory. I remember distinctly, here we were soldiers about 1 hour by that time, and some of the new draftees, we were all involuntary. I don't mean that we wouldn't have volunteered, but we hadn't. We were drafted. Would stick their heads out the window of the Long Island Railroad train as we went out to Camp Upton, and when they would see some young fellow, they'd holler out at him, "Slacker, slacker." But anyway, we got there, and that night was December 30, 1942, was my first night in the Army. I remember it vividly because we were taken to the warehouse. It was probably it was in the evening because I remember it was dark, and we were issued our uniforms and our clothes, our shoes, everything else, and they were all put in a barracks bag, and I remember vividly struggling under the weight of the barracks bag to go to our first barracks. So we were there that night, and I remember again keenly, because it was a traumatic situation, the sergeant hollering at us, and he said, "You sleep in that bed, you make that bed. You walk on that floor, you clean that floor." And he made it very clear we were in the Army. Well, I don't remember, I think it was probably the next day, but I really remember unclearly. We were put on a troop train, I guess at Penn Station, it must have been. I'm unclear about my memory here. And we were trying to figure out where we were going. We had never been outside of New York before. And finally, the train went past Philadelphia. So when it went past Philadelphia, I knew we weren't going to the west. We were going somewhere in the south. But the south was filled with Air Force installations during the war. Finally, in due time, and it must have been a couple of days, we found ourselves out in an obviously tropical environment with no station at all, and it was the military siding for Miami, Florida. There were no buildings or anything, just a platform where we unloaded, and we got in trucks, and we were taken to Miami Beach, where there were at that time 100,000 draftees getting ready for basic training. The Army had taken over all of the hotels. There was no more tourist business there. And they had removed all the hotel furnishings in the little hotel that I was put in. 6 bunks had been put in, one on top of the other. We were several high, and that's where we were sent. It was at 37th Street and Collins Avenue. It was, as I recall, I think a 2- or 3-story little private, small hotel, and it was just filled with hundreds. Must have been a couple of hundred people in it. In later years, maybe conceivably in the 70s, I was down in Miami Beach once with my wife, and we walked and found the building was still there. I don't know whether it's there anymore. I would be very surprised. So the Army used all the empty space in Miami Beach area, and there was plenty of empty space. They put up giant mess halls for feeding thousands of soldiers, and there were plenty of empty space for drill fields. They took over an old golf course or golf courses for training and so on. The training was very intensive physically. We really were toughened up, and I surely needed it. And I was assigned, after I completed my basic training, because there were huge numbers of soldiers being drafted at that point, I was assigned, I was sent to NCO school. I was non-commissioned officer school, and I had further training. And then when I was finished, I was assigned as a drill instructor who would be training other soldiers coming in. And by this time I was in pretty good shape, and I was beginning to learn a little bit about what leadership was. The Army surely knows how to teach it. And from sometime, I would guess in the, I don't know, summer, fall of 1943, I was a drill instructor. I had qualified also as a sharpshooter on the rifle and submachine gun. So that was it.